So the first thing we need to understand, we're going to learn about plant adaptations, so how certain plants have adapted to live in certain conditions. But before we understand that, we really need to understand the structure of the leaf. So you need to understand like why it has different layers. So can you pause the video and think, why does it have a cuticle? What does the palisade layer do? So I would draw this down. So the top bit, the cuticle, what does that do? What does the palisade layer do? What does the spongy layer do with the air spaces? What does the xylem do? What do guard cells do? And what's the job of stomata? So pause the video now and have a think about them different things, and I'll go through it in a second. Right, so the cuticle first of all, so that its job is to keep water in. So it stops water evaporating needlessly from the leaf. So the cuticle it's sometimes called the waxy cuticle. It's waterproof, so water can't just evaporate out all of the leaves. The next layer is the palisade layer, and its job is this is where most photosynthesis takes place. So there's lots and lots of chloroplasts in that layer, and it absorbs most of the sunlight. It does most of the photosynthesis. Right, the next layer is the spongy layer, which has got air spaces in, and its job is gas exchange. So leaves are also a bit like lungs of a tree. That's where gas exchange happens. So during the daytime, plants need tons and tons of carbon dioxide. So CO2 can diffuse into the different cells because it's got all these air spaces, which massively increases the surface area between the air and the cells of the plant. So the spongy layer, that's where gas exchange mainly takes place. Right, the bottom of the leaf, this is where stomata are, or singular is stoma, and what they do is they can open when it's nice and sunny and during the daytime, and that lets carbon dioxide into the leaf, and they can close at night time, and that's to preserve water. So remember that the stoma, they let carbon dioxide in during the daytime, but they close during the night time so the plant can keep water in, and that is the most important part of the leaf for the next thing that we're going to do, which is plant adaptations. Right, not all plants have big broad leaves. So the first thing we're going to try and understand is how cactuses are adapted to live in really, really hot, really, really dry areas. So they've got a few adaptations. Right, the first thing is that some species have got hairs, and what that does is it basically stops wind taking any water away, so it reduces airflow over the plant. Right, the next thing, and it's kind of fairly similar to that, so lots of plants have got really broad, thin leaves, and that's to maximize the amount of sun that can hit it, whilst minimizing the amount of cells it needs. So really, really broad, thin leaves. Cacti, their limiting factor is never light. So cactuses live in really, really bright, really sunny deserts. Their limiting factor is water. So cactuses are designed to keep as much water in as possible, and they're not too worried about having really big leaves that can capture sunlight, because light's not a limiting factor for them. So what they have got are spines which have got chloroplasts in, and what that does is it basically minimizes the surface area so less water can escape. The spines are obviously also for protection, so if there's any herbivores in the desert, they can't just go up and eat cactuses, they'll be put off from the spines. But the main, one adaptation of the spine is they have a really small surface area, so water doesn't evaporate as easily from the surface as it would if there were big broad leaves. Right, the next thing is that, so the stomata are normally found on the underside of leaves in most plants. What the cactus does is, so its stomata kind of like, it curves in on itself into these valleys, and the stomata are actually down in there. So the stomata are sunken, and what that does is, it basically, so if we think about the stomata being here in these valleys, so what can happen is, when water evaporates, it goes here. There's obviously lots and lots of water inside of the cell, inside of the cactus itself, but because the water hangs around a bit longer in these valleys than it would if it was just flat, the wind would take it away. And what that does is, it makes less of a concentration gradient, or sorry, it keeps less of a concentration gradient because there's water there. And what that does is it keeps water inside of the plant. So all you really need to understand there is, I was write this sentence out, the adaptations of cactuses. So number one, it has spines. Why does it have spines? Because there's less surface area for water to evaporate from. Number two, they have stomata which are in like valleys or in dents. Why does it do that? That keeps water in as well. And why does it do that? It kind of, if you want an explanation, it's because the water, when it escapes from the cactus, but it hangs around for a bit longer in them valleys, so less water is going to leave the plant to take its place. Because if we've got a high concentration of water inside the cactus, and if it didn't have them stomata, there would be a very low concentration of water. So diffusion would happen really, really quickly there. If there's a high concentration and they do have valleys, basically the water there is going to increase the concentration. So we could say like there's a medium concentration of water. So there would be less of a concentration gradient, so diffusion is not going to happen as quickly. Hope that makes sense. But it keeps water in, the fact that they've got sunken stomata which are in valleys. Right, the third adaptation, and this one does not happen in plants that are in our country. It's that cacti, the stomata only open at night time. And the reason is because if they open during the day, the plant would lose far too much water. So they only open at night time when it's cool, and they do gas exchange at night time so they can get the carbon dioxide in without losing too much water. And they store that carbon dioxide to use during the day as one of the reactants in photosynthesis. So that's it. And then the last one is that the stems store water. So it might not rain for a month in the desert, but what happens when it does rain, the plant can soak it up, and it's got these really like meaty leaves which store lots and lots of water, and they swell up, and then they've got that water, and they can store that for a long time. Right, last adaptation is they've got really, really thick waxy cuticles, and again that's just to stop water evaporating from the surface. So they are the adaptations of cactuses. So I count that there's 5 good ones there. I would say the most difficult ones, and the ones I want you to remember, is that they've got sunken stomata. That, if you're going to remember one, that's the most important one. The fact that they've got spines instead of leaves, I think that's really, really important. And then that the stomata only open at night. So the other ones that they've got the stem, they're like cactuses store water. You probably knew that in primary school. So these are like more of the GCSE higher level sort of things that you're probably going to get assessed on. Right, next type of plant is the conifer. So how are conifers designed to survive in the conditions that they survive in? Right, if we think about the Earth as, so the equator being in, like that gets the most sun. Around the equator you've got the tropics, so north and south of the equator, and there you get really dry conditions sometimes, and you get cactuses living there, and you also get rainforests which you've got huge trees. that's a different kind of zone to what most of the UK is like. We're in a kind of temperate region that expands down to like hotter countries as well. But this is a generalization. But there you've got big trees like oak trees and things like that. Further north again, we'll have cooler regions, and this is kind of where the conifers live. What you should know about conifers is, so they are evergreen, they don't drop their leaves in the winter, and they've got pines instead of leaves, so they've got these little needles. So why do they have needles? It's the first thing we need to understand. Right, one of the reasons why they have needles is that snow doesn't stick to them, so it doesn't weigh the tree down, it doesn't snap branches. So that is generally, honestly, one of the reasons why they have these needles. So they've evolved them so water kind of drips off, so they don't get weighed down by too much snow sticking to them. So you can say one reason why conifers or evergreens have needles instead of leaves is that snow doesn't stick. Right, another reason is that for much of the year these things can live where there's no liquid water because it's snow or ice. So again, they are adapted to not lose water. So they have needles, so it's got a small surface area, so they don't lose much water through evaporation. And another adaptation they've got in their needles is they've got sunken stomata. So this is if we cut one of the needles like this way and we looked at it under a microscope. So these will be the xylem. This is like the outer waxy cuticle. So again, they've got thick waxy cuticles, so they don't lose much water. And then the stomata are kind of in these little holes here. So again, they've got sunken stomata, so water doesn't evaporate as quickly from the surface. Right, so have a look at all the questions about this now. So this will be under 6E. So there's 3 worksheets with 6E written on them. Have a go at them, and nobody has sent me any questions that they didn't understand. So that either people aren't working hard enough or everybody understands every question they've tried. Fair play, right? Get in touch with me if you don't understand a question. So try a question. If you don't understand it, what you should do is, so check the mark scheme first. Does the answer written down make sense to you? If it does, great, you've learned that thing. If it doesn't make sense, get in touch with me and I might be able to do a short video explaining that thing. So I know we're not doing live lessons, and that's because I've still got students in year 11 in school at the minute, and I just think it's not going to work as well as this, but I can still give you like feedback. So when you're doing your work, get in touch with us. I can either do a written explanation or I might record a short video if it's easier to explain it that way. So don't think I can't give feedback to you, because I still can, right? Keep up the hard work. Because this is a double lesson,